I'd actually like to begin by congratulating the other speakers who spoke here before me. I felt very compelled by the formality with which they composed themselves, and I don't see myself as qualified to deliver such a serious speech with such elegance and grace, and it is for that reason that I render the remainder of my speech using language that we are more familiar with. If the mewing Grinch got knee surgery to mock the Hodge in the AP Brainrot exam, you'd think he'd buy a property in Egypt, but that's not actually the case. What would he do? Well, for starters, he wouldn't be looking at me as lost as some of the older folk in the crowd are right now. For those of you who actually understood what I said, congratulations, you're cooked. But I'm also part of a growing generation of modernists who refuse to accept the way that things are done in this world. My name is Cameron Shakur, professional brainrot advocate, or simply put, unemployed. 3 things for you today. First, I'll be talking about how brainrot is modernism. Secondly, why it's not a new and dangerous threat. And finally, how it's essential to a democracy. Now, most of you cringed really hard at what I just said, but nonetheless, you were more engaged than if my speeches were otherwise on something like, I don't know, differential calculus. Now, for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, brain rot is the deterioration of one's intellectual state from over-consuming absurdist material. Now, that sounds pretty similar to modernism, which is the concurrent search for new forms of expression. Well, if I say someone has aura, they're reputable. If I say someone deserves 5 big booms, they're amazing. And if I say someone is capping, they're lying. This zeitgeist of new English completely subverts traditional anaphora, slang, and syntax, assigning value to the invalued, making meaning out of the meaningless. Brainrot is reforming the arbitrary words we use in English today, with words which are as random and nonsensical as words like perspicacious or perspicuous. I don't even know the difference between those 2 words. And to be honest, neither do you. The infamous rallying cry for modernism is make it new, which urges people to take traditional speeches like this one and make it skibbity. Is a word that means nothing, just like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Brainrot takes our polarized, hierarchical society of language and it defenestrates it. It unifies us together in a new and common language. And you don't have to be an English major to know what the chopped chin means, but you do if you want to use a word like anti-disestablishmentarianism. And if you think that this isn't a problem that affects you, let me give you an example. Tell me which one you understand better, 1 or 2. 1. Billy has a strong temporomandibular joint. 2. Billy is mewing. Hands up for 1, and hands up for 2. See? Brainrot reintroduces unusable vocabulary into our lives with ease. All of you knew what mewing was, but almost none what the temporomandibular joint. This is because the average person uses 2,000 words in a day out of the 1 million in the English language. Chat, this is a problem. Apologies to all English preservationists, but just put the fries in the bagel, bro. Evolves with the English language and not against it. Lock in, because if you don't, the world is going to leave you in 2024 just like we did with Vex bolts. We're evolving as a species. And one day, even brain rot will sound like Old English. And this is my second point, why brain rot isn't a new phenomenon. If someone took the brain rot words of my speech and showed it to a Victorian child, they'd probably look at you a bit weird. But chat, what if I told you even Victorian society was brain rotted? What if I told you brain rot was created by William Shakespeare? You heard me? Shakespeare admits that he too doom scrolls and consumes brain rot in his play Act 2, Scene 7, As You Like It, when he writes, from hour to hour, we rot and rot. And we know he's brain rotted because every time we read his work, none of us know what he's talking about. In his play Othello, written in 1604, Shakespeare writes in Act 1, Scene 1, give me a taper. Did he perhaps mean the low taper fade? Yes, the low taper fade was massive 400 years ago. And Henry V, Act 2, Scene 2, Shakespeare writes, a man's chin shall remember me. Does that perhaps remind you of a very tough chin, a very chopped chin? Think about it. In Richard III, Act 1, Scene 1, Shakespeare writes, now is the winter of our discontent. Well, he's clearly in his winter arc. In Macbeth, Act 1, Scene 7, Shakespeare scolds, it were well if it were done quickly, where he's urging Macbeth to just put the fries in the bag. Now, Shakespeare adds love and be silent, referring to nonchalant Riz. And who he Riz? The Huz. The infamous war cry, huzzah. That's where it all began from. 112 years ago today, Sir Robert Jones wrote, to restore a man to his feet, we must first mend the knee. And what is mending the knee? knee surgery. I'd like to thank PragerU for sponsoring these interpretations. Brainrot is an aspect of modernism which has always been part of the human experience. From Shakespeare to Skibbity Toilet, from the Rizzler to Le Charisme Français, brainrot has never diminished a society's ability to function. In fact, it has allowed the freedom of expression to spread and be more accessible to our youth. And this is my third point for you today. Why brainrot is the past, present, and future. In 2023, UNESCO reports that over 50% of students worldwide failed to meet the minimum proficiency levels in reading and writing English. Why? It's because English has too many rules, too many words, too many useless, baseless, meaningless, inauthentic formalities which no one cares about anymore. Brainrot, on the other hand, it's simple, it's engaging, it's modern, it's fun, and it gives a voice to the youth where we might not otherwise have one. There's even an Australian politician, Senator Fatma Payman of Western Australia, who addressed the nation's parliament not as Mr. or Mrs. Speaker, but as the Sigmas of Australia. Guys, she's literally Oramaxing. She talks about undelivered government promises, saying, this goofy government has been capping, which caught the attention of nearly every youth in the world. And if you don't believe me, name me one other thing any senator in the world has ever said. See? If we want a functional democracy where youth can participate equally, we need to drop the formalities, we need to adopt our minds, and we need to introduce brainrot. Today, I have told you about why brainrot is modernism, why it's not a destructive new concept, and why we need it for the future. Please do not reject the unfamiliar just because it's unfamiliar. Because Sigmas, you matter. Your voice matters. A lot of us youth don't think our voice matters in Parliament, but at least it does online through brainrot. And if you in the crowd, if you think we should give brainrot just one more chance, raise your ya and let's hear one big boom! Boom!